struck me that there was so much I could do in introducing Professor Kidula, my friend and sister Jean, that I really should have mentioned as I listened to her. First of all, it followed a musical pattern of slowly picking up steam, and I started hearing her almost preaching it. And that's very musical, how the music can grow and pick up in tempo and build to this climax. And I also heard the preaching in it. And it would have been helpful to tell you that she comes from a family where her parents were some of the first Kenyan missionaries in Kenya. We have the misnotion that missionaries are white. And I heard her missionizing as she was speaking, and thank you for that. And thank you for recalling that in me. At Daystar University that I helped write some of the first curriculum and help build, Professor Talitwala, who became the vice chancellor and really developed the university, he always was planning for a pioneer chapel at the new campus out in Athi River. And he was the one who taught me this. He says, it's going to include the pioneer African missionaries. And I think we need to be remembering that all peoples and all nations are called to join in the mission conversation. And we were together with Reuben Kigami this summer at the Global Consultation on Mission. And he really is a missionary through song. And we can see that happening. I still don't have any. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Oh, 2. This is getting good. How can we meet the need, assumption there, and desire to go back to the deep roots, but also honor, and at the same time, honor the authentic blend of contemporary cultures at work in Africa?
What I'm hearing in there is that most people don't understand that we are also historical beings. And a lot of people do not really think about where they came from a lot. If you were here for Megan's lecture, you saw that the continent has a lot of very, very young people. And all of you who have children who are teenagers do know that those people usually think their parents don't know anything and never went through anything and don't listen to you. And sometimes we treat the music like that, like you have no idea where something came from. I think of myself actually as an African music historian. I look at what has gone on before in order to better help the people that I study or study with to understand what they are thinking and why they are creating the way they do. So it is good to know where you came from, and sometimes that helps you to be a better person, hopefully. Psychology person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah, and sometimes in ignoring the history, even if you think about if you have a history of, like my father died of a heart attack. So maybe we have a history of something like that. And I better be aware of it so that I don't do the things that he did, like eating a lot of meat, which I really love, that might lead to that. So sometimes knowing that history helps us to be better, to move forward easier, and to not make, to make better decisions and things like that. So while there is an amazing blend on the continent of musics of all kinds. In fact, this summer when I was in Ghana, I went to a Catholic church and we sang everything from chants to pop song, like in the same service. That is typical in a lot of congregations in the city or even in the villages, that you have all these big blends. But sometimes it's such that people ignore one type and they think they're moving forward, not knowing the foundation on which something has been laid. So as a historian, I really think about foundations as important places to start. Otherwise, you are floating in a vacuum.
Thank you. Could you also speak to, I was really struck by how you discussed liminal space to express these anxieties. Could you talk more about those anxieties? I know you did, but help us understand it better.
The way that the world is moving is really fast. Mm-hmm. People rarely take time to sit back or take a break or just be still and quiet so that they can look and see where they're coming from, where they're going, and just reflect better on what's going on. So one of the things that music does, it freezes a certain moment in time so that you can come back to it and it helps you to move forward. That's one of the things that music does. So it tells a story really, really slowly. When I'm talking like this, I'm saying so many, many words, but I might just have a proverb or I might just have a gesture that really puts together something. So that's that space where you freeze to think, okay, what's going on now? So that you can know where you're going or where you're not going, especially in this world that the changes are too fast. They're very drastic and they're immediate. And if you are left behind, you are in trouble because you don't know what's going on like that. So I don't think this is an African problem. I think this is a global problem that people don't have time to be quiet and still or to just stop the phone thing. You know, you don't have to be on the phone 24/7 or to leave your phone on when you're sleeping and then wonder why you're so tired the next day. So it's those liminal spaces, that place where you can sleep and think, which usually used to be like circumcision ceremonies. That's what they did to the boys. They would take the boys out to the forest so that they could be able to think about what does it mean to become a man, you know, like that. So, but some of the ways they did them were crazy. But, you know, Native Americans, they would go on the quest just so you learn who you are like that. So music and other arts help people to just come back to this space and be still and then come out of there a little more rested and a little better to think about where else to go. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Would you like to comment on that? No? Okay. Here's another question. How do you see Kigame and the Sukus Rumba genre informing and influencing contemporary Kenyan gospel and Kenyan hip-hop?
I just use Kigame as one example of the things that happen. I could have taken an example from hip-hop and done exactly the same thing. Because all these things are informed by all kinds of resources where these people come from. So Kigame's song was just an example because I work in popular music of that kind at the moment that I was at. And also because he's very, very influential in bridging the gap between old school and whatever else is happening. So I just took the middle person because he's kind of bridging this gap. Because even his rumba style is actually kind of a 70s rumba style. Much more than, there have been like many iterations of rumba, but he picked that one because it was safer than if he took Madiaba, which is like 80s, 90s, where people just start doing all kinds of things in church and you'll wonder where you are. Like that. And there are musicians who've done that, and there are news articles about people coming to church like they go to a club, like literally in when the gospel music industry was really, really hot. People actually came to church rather than going to clubs because you could dance better in church, and people would see you because that also became a socializing space. So people could see you could get, you know, traction with your dancing like that. It became like that. So he uses an old rumba style where people don't have the more suggestive dancing that comes with later styles. So that's why I used him in that sense. But he has rap and hip hop pieces also. He has reggae pieces. He has reggaeton that I could have picked. But this I felt was a good example because of the various religious strains that inform it.
Good, thank you. What about those who won't participate in the choir? That is, it seems notable that more conservative adherents of the various faiths seem not to be engaged. Is there any way to bridge the deep gaps these days between polarized groups within a single faith?
One of the things I was just thinking is about, as you were sharing that, and I think that connects to the question, that one thing about learning other languages, you have the opportunity, especially if you learn it in context versus translation, you have the opportunity to think in that language and understand even values in that language. So it makes me think about the language of music, like you're just describing, when you're traversing those differing styles and finding harmony and connection in that. There's a way in which you are crossing boundaries, and some people that might be fighting about those different styles of music, you're literally finding harmony in that. And that's where I think that artists who allow themselves to be open, it's as if you're finding something in a style that might be very different from your own. And you're not only appreciating it, but you're working with it and connecting with it. And see, to me, those are some of the principles that allow us to move beyond polarization. Instead of othering people, actually seeing the contributions that they're making and allowing that to become something more than we would ever be by ourselves or by our people groups. So I think in that there's a generosity as well as a humility that ideally happens among musicians that I think could really be informative for some of the work that we need to do.
Thank you.
Polarization.
I also think that people imagine that everybody has to like every style. No.
Good. Go there.
That's
Please.
the best thing about being a Christian is, for me, is discovering all these various things that God has created that are so diverse and crazy. So she may like a style that I don't like, but we can still be friends. Right. There was a talk yesterday by Ruth about mixing, how people maintain their own identities but still cohabit with other people.
It's the interreligious dialogue.
Yes, that kind of thing. So it's possible that, I was born in a village that my parents were Pentecostal, but my grandfather was Salvation Army, and he was actually an earlier missionary than my parents.
Oh.
But I went to school in an Anglican boarding school and speaking another language. So I learned to say the creed actually in a different language, not even in English, the Apostles' Creed. And, we would go home and we would recite it and my father would just die because he was like, what? Because that was not a thing that Pentecostals did. And then 2 years later, I was in another school where we were singing God Moves in a Mysterious Way that was being done here by Presbyterians, which was just a completely other life than what we had. And we met at home because my other sisters went to other schools that did other crazy things that were different. And we lived these lives. We knew that in school we were going to sing like chants and things like that, and then go home and pass out in a Pentecostal trance. That's how big God is. He is not restricted by the boundaries that we put around ourselves because that's what makes us feel safe.
All right.
We usually ignore that part, that we are doing it because it makes us feel safe, instead of falling back and letting God make you feel safe because you fall on the rock that is higher than you, that kind of thing. I'm sorry, I'm a pastor.
I love it. Preach it.
So you do not have to like my music for us to have a conversation. People have wars because they are different. No, this is the fun part that I enjoy about teaching, that my students can become better than I because they have all kinds of resources that are different from what I give them because they get it from other people. So they'll be completely different people. I don't compete with them because I know that my calling is different. And I have another role like that. So if everybody does the same job, like she was saying, if everybody was a cook, those of us who don't cook, we would not appreciate that cooking as much. Or if everybody ate pasta, which I do not eat, it would be a different thing. But we eat ugali and people eat pilau, and it's just that mesh that is so exciting about going to heaven, that I'll get there and I'll find these people and I'll be like, whoa, that Indian dance really meant that? I didn't know. I thought it was demonic. But God was doing his thing there. But because I had my boundaries, I was trying to say, your thing isn't any good, which is part of that labor of Christianity I was talking about, that people came thinking that this is the only way you can sing to God.
Yes.
And then when people started doing that, they complained about it. Like, you Africans, you shouldn't just be singing hymns. Compose your own songs. And then you're like, but you told us that that's not what we ought to do. We need to sing a safe stronghold our God is, a bulwark never ceasing. You know, that kind of thing. When we allow God to be God, it transforms us. And we start to cohabit.
Yes.
Keep preaching.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Dr. Kidula, my friend, you're speaking about diversity and how music helps us to negotiate. This is what I'm hearing, to negotiate issues of diversity. Could you go further for us? I mean, diversity is a big issue across the states. And Dr. Briggs, when he was here, he was focusing on let's learn to listen to one another. And so am I hearing correctly when you're saying it's okay to like a different style of music?
Yeah, because I grew up that way and I haven't died yet.
Yes. It's possible. And you see, we learn, and because here's one of the things I've learned from you is that there are different layers of diversity, and it's okay. And so here, my impression in coming back to the states is that we have to all conform.
When I first came here to study, I got a Fulbright scholarship. And on my application, I was curious about coming to the States because I wanted to know, how do people in the States live all that diverse melting pot story, thing like that. So when I got here, I got shocked because it was like, you need to think like everybody else. And I was coming from a culture where we were like, oh, you think like this? Cool. Okay, let's see how effective it is. And how can I learn from you so that I can become more effective? That kind of thing. I mean, it has its wars, but it was like that. So the idea of conforming, I think, is part of the power struggle. It's we always want to dominate other people. And it's like God made us to complement each other. Like literally, that's what I believe, that God made us to complement each other. So while it is possible that I can speak 5 languages or 10 languages or something like that, it might be that specializing in one language so that I'm so good at it will help the other people like that. It doesn't mean I can't speak other languages. It just means that other people have these other expressions that are just rich. So when you worship, this is one of the things I believe about speaking in tongues. I'm sorry, the Pentecostal in me is going to come out.
Okay.
It's
we have
like
Pentecostals
God
here.
allows you to speak beyond what you understand, because the expressions that he has about who he is are bigger than what any one language can express.
Amen.
So when we all,
Beautiful.
I think that in heaven is when we will really get that there are words in Urdu that are deeper at expressing a certain aspect of God than the words in Maragoli. And then there are other words in Maragoli that are deeper than Urdu words. And this is all God.
Yes.
Bigger and greater than all that we know because of our environment.
Mm-hmm.
I better stop.
No.
You see how she's not theological? Mm-hmm. An open-ended question for Dr. Kidula, or perhaps Dr. King, and I welcome Dr. Abernethy. Are there missiological dimensions of being a good consumer, quote unquote, of music, exercising musical appreciation? How may non-musicians participate in music missiologically?
Okay, I'll go back to my ethno roots. There is
Ethnomusicology, yeah.
Yeah. There are 2 scholars who talk about music not being just about the people who produce it, but also the people who consume it. Because without the consumers, sometimes I don't have community for people to appreciate what it is I do with my art. So when I have my students write essays about themselves at the beginning of any course I teach, I tell them to tell me their musical history. And almost always when I'm explaining this before they write their essays, they tell me I am not a musician, so I do not have a music history. And I always tell them, you do have a music history if your parents drove you to school and played country music while you were sitting in the back playing some game, which had Japanese music in the background. All that has contributed to the kinds of tastes that you have in music because you consume it. And because you consume it, we keep producing it because we realize it does have an impact like that. So there are people who think that because they don't play an instrument, they're not musicians. But you listen to people who play the instruments and you encourage them to continue with their crafts like that. And as a consumer, then you are also promoting that music in that sense. So go buy the hip hop thing that Megan has, because you'll be contributing to that and you may find somebody else who likes it better than yourself in that sense. So being a consumer is just as important as being the producer of it. Just the same way as I do not make clothes, but I consume them. And it makes us look good, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And building on that, I mean, if we think about being musical, and sometimes musical might make us feel like, so that means performance, but no, it's part of that appreciation. And that there are many ways of being musical. That's what I would think about it. And that listening and the receptive posture is so important. So maybe some of us who are listeners and appreciators of music have important gifts to give to those who are performers, because we more major in listening. Mm-hmm. And that's an important perspective.
Thank you so much. Let's appreciate them one last time.
Mi